The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. Senator Maxwell Callahan was on every news channel, shaking hands, kissing babies, and talking about a brighter tomorrow. He had that slick politician vibe. Perfect hair, perfectly tailored suit, and a smile you wouldn't trust to hold your wallet. Elise, though, she was hooked. His ideas are transformative, Jason, she gushed over dinner, her fork stabbing at a pile of kale she hadn't touched. This campaign isn't just about politics, it's about real change. I replied, scrolling through my phone. Politics wasn't my thing. Elise knew that. My world was computers and algorithms, not public rallies and stage photo ops. Still, I loved her passion, even if I didn't share it. When she volunteered to join Callahan's campaign team, I figured it was just another one of her hobbies. Elise had a restless energy that always needed an outlet. Art classes, yoga retreats, starting a podcast she abandoned after 5 episodes. Sure, I said, go for it. I didn't realize how much I'd regret those words. 3 months later, our lives revolved around the campaign. Elise was out most nights, strategy meetings, voter outreach, fundraising galas. When she was home, she was glued to her laptop, typing furiously or whispering into her phone. It didn't bother me at first. We'd been married for 5 years, and trust wasn't something I questioned. I figured her obsession with Callahan's campaign would fizzle out, like everything else. Then came the gala. Elise insisted uno come. It's important for me to show up with my husband, she said, brushing on mascara in the bathroom. Besides, you need to meet the senator. You'll love him. I wasn't convinced, but I slipped into a suit and went along. The event was at a swanky downtown hotel, all chandeliers and champagne. Elise looked stunning in a red dress that hugged her curves, and I couldn't help but feel proud to have her on my arm. That pride lasted exactly 30 seconds after we walked into the room. Elise! Callahan's voice boomed across the space as he strode toward us. The man was magnetic, I'll give him that. He was taller than I expected, his handshake firm, his smile practiced. You must be Jason, he said, gripping my hand. His eyes flicked to Elise, and I caught a flicker of something that set my teeth on edge. Something too familiar, too knowing. I've heard so much about you, I replied, forcing a smile. Well, your wife's been indispensable to the campaign, he said, clapping her shoulder. We're lucky to have her. The conversation shifted, but I couldn't stop watching him. The way he lingered near Elise, the way her laugh sounded just a little too bright when he made a joke. My gut twisted, but I told myself I was imagining things. That night, though, when Elise came back from the bathroom, I noticed her lipstick was smudged. Did you touch up your makeup? I asked casually. She hesitated, just for a second. Oh yeah, she said, avoiding my eyes. It was such a small moment, but it planted a seed of doubt I couldn't shake. A week later, I got home early from work to find the house empty. Elise had texted me about a last-minute campaign meeting. I poured a drink, sat on the couch, and flicked on the TV. Her laptop was on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but an email notification popped up, pulling my eyes to the screen. From Maxwell C. Subject. Looking forward to tonight, winky face. My heart stopped. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But the moment I clicked, there was no going back. The email was short but damning. You're incredible, Elise. Can't wait to steal another moment with you. Same place? My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled through the thread. There were dozens of messages, each more intimate than the last. They'd been meeting at hotels, sharing inside jokes, talking about our secret. When I saw the attached photo, a selfie of Elise in bed, her hair a mess, and Callahan beside her, shirtless, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The front door opened. Elise walked in, her campaign badge still clipped to her blazer. Hey babe, she called. I closed the laptop and stood up, my drink forgotten. We need to talk. Her smile faltered. About what? About your emails. Her face turned white. Jason, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been screwing a married man while I'm here thinking you're saving democracy. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. The truth was out now, and there was no pretending anymore. When the words left my mouth, a heavy silence filled the room. Elise stood frozen, her hand still on the strap of her purse. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the frantic calculations of someone caught in the act. Jason, she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. It's not what you think. I barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. Not what I think. Then tell me, Elise, what exactly am I supposed to think when I see emails and pictures like that? Friends don't check into hotel rooms together. Don't insult me. She dropped her purse onto the floor and rubbed her temples. I didn't mean for this to happen, she muttered. Right, I said, my voice rising despite myself. It just happened. You accidentally fell into bed with him. Her eyes flashed, and for the first time, I saw anger flare beneath her guilt. You don't understand? Then help me understand. I shot back. My voice echoed in the room, and I realized my hands were shaking. We've been married 5 years, Elise. I thought we were happy. Was I wrong? Was I blind this whole time? Her shoulders slumped, and tears filled her eyes. It wasn't about you, she said, her voice cracking. It had nothing to do with us. That's a load of crap, I said, my throat tightening. How can you say this isn't about us? You let another man into what's supposed to be ours. Do you know how humiliating that is? She sat on the armrest of the couch, her hands gripping the fabric like it was the only thing holding her upright. Maxwell made me feel seen, she said, barely above a whisper. I laughed again, bitterly this time. Seen? Elise, I've been here every single day. I've supported you, cheered you on, loved you. And somehow, that wasn't enough. It's not about enough, she snapped, her tears now spilling freely. He's powerful, Jason. He has this way of making you feel like you're the most important person in the room. And yes, I got swept up in it. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but it wasn't about us. It was about me. You stay here, dumbfoundel. Her words felt like knives, cutting away at the foundation of everything I thought we'd built together. So what? I asked. You had some identity crisis, and your solution was to cheat on me? With him? Do you even hear yourself? She didn't answer. That night, I slept on the couch, or tried to anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their laughter, their intimacy. It wasn't just the physical betrayal that gutted me. It was the fact that she had shared parts of herself with him. Parts one thought were mine. Memories of our relationship replayed in my mind like a cruel montage. Our first date, when she spilled wine on my shirt and laughed until her sides hurt. The night I proposed, and she cried so hard she couldn't say yes for a full minute. The mornings we spent in bed, whispering about our dreams for the future. Was all of that a lie? By morning, my anger had dulled to a simmering ache. Elise came into the living room, her eyes puffy from crying. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't know how we move forward from this, I said, my voice hoarse. Do you? She hesitated. I want to try, she said finally. I want to fix this, Jason. I love you. Do you? I asked, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Because if this is love, it feels an awful lot like hate. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I couldn't. All I felt was a deep, hollow emptiness where my trust used to be. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it all. I wanted to believe her, to believe that our marriage wasn't beyond saving. But every time I looked at her, I saw him. Every time she touched me, I felt his shadow between us. Temptation, betrayal, trust. These words took on new, terrible meanings in my head, each one tied to her face, her voice, her lies. Some betrayals you can forgive. Others carve a wound so deep, you know it will never heal. I didn't know which this was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The man I was before this would never be the same again. And neither would we. I couldn't look at her without hearing his name. Maxwell Callahan. The syllables were acid on my tongue, a name that had worked its way into my marriage like a parasite. Even when Elise wasn't speaking, his presence lingered in the air, invisible but suffocating. She tried, in her way, to fix things. She stayed home more, hovering like a shadow. She'd ask if I needed anything, cook meals we barely touched, and offer tentative smiles I couldn't return. Once, she reached for my hand, and I yanked it away like her touch might burn me. The truth was I didn't know what I needed. How do you rebuild a house that's been gutted from the inside? The first time I saw Maxwell on TV after everything came out, it was by accident. I was flipping channels trying to drown out my thoughts, and there he was giving one of his classic man of the people speeches. The crowd roared as he spoke, his voice commanding, his smile dazzling. I hated him for it. But more than that, I hated the look on Elise's face as she passed through the room. She stopped, her eyes locking onto the screen for a split second too long. "Why are you watching this?" she asked, her tone defensive. I shrugged. "It's on every channel, Elise. Hard to miss." Her jaw tightened, and she left the room without another word. It wasn't until later, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, that the anger hit me full force. She wasn't angry at him, at what he'd done to us. She was angry at me for bringing it up, for forcing her to confront the wreckage she'd caused. I wasn't sure which was worse, the betrayal or the indifference. A week later, I found myself in a therapist's office, something I never thought I'd do. Elise had suggested it, but I went alone. The thought of unpacking this mess in front of her felt unbearable. The therapist, a woman named Claire, had kind eyes and a way of asking questions that felt like needles sliding under the skin. "Tell me about trust," she said, leaning forward. "What does it mean to you?" I laughed bitterly. "It used to mean everything. Now, I don't even know what it looks like." "And love. Love," I repeated, tasting the word. It felt foreign, hollow. Love's supposed to be the thing that holds it all together, right? But if it's so strong, why does it fall apart so easily? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, giving me space to hear the weight of my own words. "It sounds like you're grieving," she said finally. "Not just the loss of trust, but the loss of the relationship you thought you had." The words hit harder than I expected. Grieving. Yes, that's exactly what it felt like. Like someone I loved had died, and the person sitting in their place was a stranger wearing their face. But this wasn't just loss. It was betrayal. How do you forgive someone who shattered your world? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire met my eyes. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. Sometimes it's about giving yourself permission to move forward. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Forgiveness. Moving forward. Did I even want that? Could I forgive Elise for what she'd done? Or was I just clinging to the ruins because I was too afraid to let go? When I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of the night I proposed to her. The way she laughed through her tears, clutching the ring like it was the most precious thing in the world. I woke up with a hollow ache in my chest, the memory now tinged with bitterness. She had been everything to me once. My partner, my best friend, my safe place. Now, she was the reason I felt like I was drowning. The next morning, Elise sat across from me at breakfast, picking at her toast. She looked small, fragile, like she was waiting for me to say something that would fix everything. But there was nothing left to say. I stared at her for a long time, trying to summon the love I used to feel. Instead, all I saw was the distance between us, the chasm carved by temptation and betrayal, too wide to cross. Elise, I said finally, my voice steady but cold. I don't think I can do this anymore. Her fork clattered to her plate. Jason, please, but I didn't stay to hear the rest. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to walk away. The house was too quiet after I walked out that morning. I didn't leave permanently. I wasn't ready to take that step yet, but I spent the rest of the day wandering the city. Parks, coffee shops, aimless stretches of sidewalk. Anything to avoid going home. When I finally returned, the air was heavy, almost suffocating. Elise wasn't in the living room. Her laptop and campaign materials were gone from the kitchen table where they had practically lived for months. I thought I'd feel relief, but instead, there was an ache, a phantom pain of something missing. I climbed the stairs slowly, unsure of what I'd find. Our bedroom door was ajar, the light spilling into the hallway. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, staring at her phone. Elise, I said, my voice softer than I expected. She startled, dropping the phone onto the bed like it had burned her. You came back. For now. Her shoulders sagged. Jason, I said, cutting her off. Not tonight. She nodded, her face pale and drawn. Do you want me to sleep in the guest room? The question hung in the air, a sad echo of how far we'd fallen. I should have said yes. It would have been easier. But instead, I just shook my head and walked to the bathroom, shutting the door behind me. Lying next to her that night felt like torture. We didn't touch, didn't speak, didn't even breathe too loudly. The distance between us was more than physical. It was a chasm filled with every unspoken word, every betrayal, every doubt. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last few months in my mind. The late nights, the secretive smiles, the way her laughter sounded different when she was talking about him. Had it started there, or had the cracks always been there, waiting for someone like Callahan to exploit them? I glanced at Elise. Her back was to me, her body curled into itself like she was trying to disappear. In the dim light, she looked so small, so vulnerable. For a fleeting moment, I felt something close to pity. But then I remembered the emails, the photos, the way she'd chosen him over us. Pity gave way to anger, then to something colder. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of her moving around the kitchen. It was almost like old times, except nothing about us felt old anymore. We were something new now, something fractured and sharp-edged. "I made breakfast," she said when I walked in. Her voice was tentative, like she was afraid I'd snap. I ignored the plate she'd set out and poured myself a coffee. "We need to talk." Her shoulders tensed, but she nodded. "Okay." I sat across from her, the table between us feeling like a battlefield. "Why am?" I asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. "Out of all the people, why Maxwell Callahan?" She looked down at her hands, twisting a napkin into knots. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. "He made me feel important." "Important?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "I've spent years trying to make you feel important, Elise. What was so special about him?" "It's not about you, Jason," she said, her voice cracking. "It's not that you weren't enough. I was the one who wasn't enough. I've been feeling invisible, like I'm just drifting. And then Maxwell came along, and he noticed me." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "So what?" I asked. "You traded our marriage for a few compliments? For a man who notices everyone because it's his job?" Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't expect you to understand. I don't even understand it myself. But I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that she regretted it, that she was willing to fight for us. But the damage was done, and her apology felt like pouring water on a house that had already burned down. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't be in a marriage where I'm constantly wondering if I'm enough for you." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she whispered, "don't give up on us." I stood, my coffee untouched. "You already did." As I walked out the door, I felt the weight of her gaze on my back. This time I wasn't coming back, not until I figured out if there was anything left of me to save. When I left, I didn't know where I was going. I just drove, the streets blurring under the haze of my anger and exhaustion. Part of me wanted to drive forever, to escape everything, the betrayal, the memories, even my own thoughts. But you can't outrun the wreckage of your life, no matter how fast you go. I ended up at the lake, a place we used to visit when we first started dating. Back then, it had been our sanctuary. We'd spend hours there, lying on the dock, talking about the future as the water lapped beneath us. I sat in the car, staring at the empty shoreline, and wondered how that couple had turned into this. Somewhere between the calm surface of the lake and the storm in my chest, I realized something. I didn't just feel betrayed by Elise. I felt betrayed by myself. I'd built my world around her, trusted her completely, and in the process, I'd ignored the warning signs. The late nights, the deflections, the way she started pulling away long before Callahan entered the picture. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that our love was unshakable. But love doesn't make you bulletproof. When I got home that evening, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the kitchen light. Elise was sitting at the table, her hands clasped around a mug of tea. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't know if you were coming back," she said quietly. I didn't answer. I hung up my coat and sat across from her. The table between us a chasm we couldn't seem to bridge. "You're right," she said after a long silence. "I gave up on us. I let my own insecurities, my own selfishness, destroy what we had. And I don't know if I can ever fix it, but I want to try. Her words sounded earnest, but they felt like hollow echoes in my chest. I'd heard versions of this apology before, words that begged for forgiveness but offered no guarantees. What happens the next time you feel invisible, Elise? I asked, my voice sharp. Do you find someone else to fill the void? How am I supposed to trust you when I know how easily you gave up on us? She flinched, her grip tightening on the mug. I don't have an answer for that, she admitted. All I know is that I hate what I've done to us, to you. I hate myself for being so weak, for letting temptation ruin everything we built. I leaned back in my chair, her confession washing over me like cold water. You didn't just ruin it, Elise. You obliterated it. And the worst part? You didn't even think about what it would do to me. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't feel pity. Not this time. I was selfish, she said, her voice trembling. I let my own needs come first, and I lost sight of what really mattered. Your needs? I said, my voice rising. What about my needs, Elise? What about the nights I waited for you, trusting that you were just working late? What about the years I spent loving you, believing that love was enough? She didn't have an answer. She just cried, and for once, I didn't try to comfort her. That night, I slept in the guest room. It was a strange feeling, lying in a bed that wasn't mine in a house that no longer felt like home. The walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating, as though they carried the weight of every argument, every betrayal. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this it? Was this the end of us? Or was there some sliver of hope buried beneath the rubble of our marriage? But as the hours stretched on, the answer became clearer. Some things, once broken, can never truly be put back together. When the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I made my decision. I'd fought for us as long as I could, but now, it was time to fight for myself. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, divorce, separation, or just time apart. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. The man I used to be, the man who trusted blindly and loved deeply, was gone. And maybe that was the greatest betrayal of all. Tomorrow, I'd tell Elise. Tomorrow, I'd start over. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity and dread. My decision felt like a stone in my chest, heavy but resolute. There was no going back. I found Elise in the living room, still wearing the oversized sweatshirt she had slept in. She was curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the morning news. Her tea sat untouched on the table, the steam long gone. I cleared my throat, and she looked up, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, her eyes brimming with unspoken fears. "I know," she whispered. I sat down across from her, the words I'd practiced all night tangled in my throat. "Elise," I began, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what's left of us." Her lips trembled. "Jason, please, let me finish." My voice was firm, but not harsh. I wasn't here to punish her. I was here to be honest, even if the truth would cut us both. "I don't know how to move forward from this," I said. "I don't know how to rebuild something that feels so broken. Every time I look at you, all I see is him. All I feel is what you took from me, from us." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't interrupt. She just nodded, her hands twisting in her lap like she was trying to hold herself together. "I gave you everything, Elise," I continued, my voice breaking. "I trusted you in ways I've never trusted anyone. And you didn't just betray that trust. You shattered it. And the worst part is I don't think you even realize how deep the damage goes." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. "This isn't just about the affair," I said. "It's about the lies, the selfishness, the way you let me believe we were still us while you were out there with him." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she choked out. "I was stupid, Jason. I was selfish, and I hate myself for it. But I love you. Ido." I shook my head, the words piercing me like knives. "Love isn't enough, Elise. Not anymore." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt the faintest flicker of guilt. But it wasn't enough to change my mind. Later that day, I started packing. Not much, just a bag of essentials and some clothes. Elise hovered nearby, her eyes red and swollen. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "A friend's place," I said. "Just for a while." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. Is this it?" I paused, my heart twisting at the raw vulnerability in her voice. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I need space. I need time to figure out who I am without this, without us." Her tears started again, but I turned away. I couldn't bear to watch her crumble, not when I was barely holding myself together. As I loaded my bag into the car, I thought about the man I used to be, the man who believed in happily ever afters, who thought love could conquer anything. That man felt like a stranger now, a ghost of someone I used to know. Elise stood on the porch, watching me with a look that was equal parts despair and longing. For a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered the emails, the lies, the nights I spent alone while she was with him. The weight of it all crushed any fleeting doubts. I started the car, and as I pulled away, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. I had taken the first step towards something new, but it came at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. That night, as I lay on a friend's couch, the silence felt deafening. No sound of Elise's soft breathing beside me, no familiar creak of the floorboards in our home. It was just me alone with my thoughts. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of everything I'd lost and everything I might still gain. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to remind me that life goes on, even after the breaking point. And maybe, just maybe, so would I. Days turned into weeks, and the raw edges of leaving Elise didn't so much heal as they dulled into a constant ache. I stayed with my friend Eric, who didn't ask too many questions, a kindness I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. "You sure you don't want to talk about it?" he'd ask occasionally, setting a beer on the table beside me as I stared blankly at the TV. I'd shake my head. Not yet. Talking felt dangerous, like saying the words out loud would make everything real in ways I wasn't ready to face. But the silence wasn't much better. I lived in my own head, replaying memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. Elise's laughter during our first dance, the way her eyes lit up when I told her I loved her, the smell of her hair on lazy Sunday mornings when the world felt small and safe. Now, those memories felt tainted, like someone had scrawled over them in red ink, marking every moment with lies I hadn't known were there. One night, after Eric had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through social media. I'd avoided it since leaving, too afraid to see her posts, her face, or worse, his. But curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was staring at her profile picture. She hadn't changed it. It was still the two of us, smiling at some beach I couldn't even remember. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how easily someone can wear a mask, even in the most intimate parts of their life. I clicked away, but my fingers hovered over the search bar. I knew I shouldn't, but I typed his name anyway. Maxwell Callahan. His profile was exactly what I expected. Polished, professional. Every post curated to show a man who was driven, likable, untouchable. But as I scrolled, I noticed something strange. The comments on his recent posts weren't the usual adoring praise. Instead, they were littered with accusations. Words like affair, scandal, and resign jumped out at me, and my heart started to race. I clicked on one of the links someone had shared. It led to an article with a headline that stopped me cold. New allegations surface in Maxwell Callahan affair. Financial impropriety, campaign fallout. I skimmed the article, my breath catching as the pieces fell into place. Callahan wasn't just under fire for his affair. He was being investigated for misusing campaign funds, some of which were allegedly tied to Elise. The walls of my life, already cracked and crumbling, seemed to collapse entirely. The next day, I called Elise. It was the first time we'd spoken since I left, and I wasn't sure what I expected to hear. "Jason," she said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't think I'd hear from you." "Cut the small talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "What the hell is going on with Callahan? And why is your name in the middle of it?" She sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. He told me it was above board, that everything was fine. I was stupid, Jason. I believed him. Did you funnel money for him? I asked bluntly. Her silence was answer enough. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said finally, her voice breaking. I thought I was helping him, helping the campaign. I didn't know he was using me. You mean like you used me? I shot back. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me, but I didn't care. Jesus, Elise, how many lives did you plan on ruining for him? She started to cry, but I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt. Instead, I felt cold, detached. This wasn't the woman I had loved. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of lies and betrayal on a scale I could barely comprehend. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I didn't answer. I hung up and stared at my phone, wondering if there was anyone left in my life I could actually trust. That night, I sat on Eric's porch, staring up at the stars. The weight of everything. Her betrayal, Callahan's corruption, the fallout that seemed inevitable, pressed down on me until I felt like I could barely breathe. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but one thing was clear. I was done being collateral damage in their disaster. If Elise and Callahan wanted to burn their worlds to the ground, they could do it without me. But I wouldn't be standing on the sidelines. I'd be the one holding the match. I couldn't sleep after that call. Elise's broken voice echoed in my head, her words tangled with my own thoughts like barbed wire. She was sorry for the affair, for the lies, for the mess she'd made. But it wasn't enough. Sorry didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't undo the damage. And it certainly didn't fix the fact that I'd been dragged into her nightmare. By morning, the cold clarity of anger had taken root. Elise had made her choices. Callahan had made his. Now it was my turn. I pulled out the file I'd received from the private investigator weeks ago. I'd barely looked at it then, too raw from the discovery of her affair to process the full weight of its contents. But now I was ready. The file was a trove of information. Bank transfers, emails, receipts. It painted a picture of a campaign drowning in dirty money and shadowy deals. And there, in the margins, was Elise, smaller players, sure, but complicit nonetheless. The question was, what was I going to do about it? That afternoon, I made a call to Karen, my lawyer. She picked up on the second ring, her voice brisk but warm. Jason, been a while. What's on your mind? I need to move forward with the divorce, I said. But there's more. I've got information about Elise, about Callahan. Financial stuff, shady campaign deals. I don't want to sit on it anymore. Karen's tone shifted, growing sharper. You're sure you want to go down that road? It could get messy. It's already messy, I said. And I'm done being dragged through the mud while they get away with everything. I want this out in the open. There was a pause on the line, and I could almost hear her calculating the angles. All right, she said finally. Send me what you've got, and I'll handle the rest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control, small but real. The media firestorm started 2 days later. Headlines screamed about corruption, leaked documents, and questionable campaign practices. Maxwell Callahan became a household scandal, and Elise's name wasn't far behind. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages, but I ignored them all. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, least of all Elise. That didn't stop her from trying. She called 3 times that evening before finally leaving a voicemail. Her voice was frantic, panicked. Jason, please, you have to call me back. I know this is you. I know you leaked everything. Don't do this to me, to us. We can still fix this. Just please call me. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. By the end of the week, Callahan had resigned from his position. His face, once plastered on campaign posters and TV ads, was now splashed across every news outlet, tarnished by scandal. Elise wasn't far behind. She issued a statement denying knowledge of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but instead, there was only emptiness. Watching their empire crumble didn't undo the betrayal or fill the void their actions had left. It was justice, sure, but it wasn't closure. That night, Eric handed me a beer and sat beside me on the porch. So, he said, breaking the silence, how does it feel, taking them down? I stared at the bottle in my hand, the condensation slick against my palm. I thought it would feel better, I admitted. That's because it's not about them, Eric said. It's about you. You're not going to find peace until you figure out what you need, not what you want them to lose. His words stuck with me long after he went inside. The next morning, I packed up my things and left Eric's place. Not to go back to Elise, but to find something new. A new apartment, a new routine, a new version of myself that wasn't defined by what she'd done. As I drove away, I thought about the fire I'd lit under Callahan's career, about the ruins I'd left in my wake. There was satisfaction in knowing they'd face consequences, but it wasn't the kind of satisfaction that lasted. The road stretched out ahead of me, uncertain but full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, not for what was behind me, but for what might still lie ahead. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The day Elise was served the divorce papers, she called me. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm but distant. Jason, she said, her voice trembling. I got the papers. I figured you would. I replied, keeping my tone steady. There was a pause, the kind of silence that hangs heavy between two people who used to share everything. Finally, she spoke. So that's it? You're just done? Elise, I've been done for a while, I said. This is just the part where we make it official. Her breath caught, and for a second, I thought she might start crying. But when she spoke again, her voice was sharp, almost angry. You could have at least talked to me first, given me a chance to fix this. I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. Fix this? Elise, you had months to fix this, years even, but you didn't. You chose him, you lied to me, and now you're trying to act like this is something I'm doing to you. That's not fair, she snapped, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, Jason. A terrible mistake. But I didn't want it to end like this. Neither did I said, my voice softer now. But this isn't about what we want anymore. It's about what's left. And what's left, Elise, isn't enough. She didn't respond. The line went quiet, except for the sound of her breathing. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I just ended the call and stared at my phone, the weight of her words pressing down on me. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment, a small, one-bedroom place with no history, no memories. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in months, there was no chaos, no shouting, no lies. Just quiet. And yet, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, full of questions I couldn't answer. Who was I now, without Elise? Without the life we'd built together? I thought about the man I'd been before all of this. Hopeful, trusting, maybe even a little naive. That version of me felt like a stranger now, someone I could barely recognize. The whiskey burned as I swallowed, but it didn't warm me. It didn't chase away the cold emptiness that had settled in my chest. The next morning, I went for a run, hoping the rhythm of my feet pounding against the pavement would drown out my thoughts. It didn't. Instead, the memories came rushing back. Her laughter, her touch, the way she used to look at me like I was her whole world. When had that stopped? Had I missed the signs because I didn't want to see them, or because I was too caught up in believing we were untouchable? By the time I got back to the apartment, I was drenched in sweat and no closer to answers. A week later, I got an email from Karen. Divorce proceedings are moving smoothly, she wrote. Elise has agreed to your terms. Should be finalized soon. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as I read them over and over. This was what I wanted, closure, freedom. But as I sat there, I realized something. Freedom comes with a cost. Letting go of Elise meant letting go of the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the person I thought I was when I was with her. It also meant facing the truth that I was starting over alone. That night, I called Eric. Hey, I said when he picked up, you want to grab a drink? Thought you'd never ask, he replied. As we sat at the bar later, nursing our beers, Eric gave me a sideways glance. You doing okay? I shrugged. Some days are better than others. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. You'll get there, he said. Might not feel like it now, but you will. For the first time, I believed him. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. The cost of freedom was steep, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The morning the divorce was finalized, I woke up early. It was the kind of day that seemed out of place in my life. Clear skies, golden sunlight streaming through the blinds. The world outside looked untouched by the wreckage I'd been sifting through for months. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, staring at a mug of coffee that had gone cold. I thought I'd feel something, relief, sadness, anger, but all I felt was a strange, hollow quiet. The finality of it hadn't hit yet. Karen called around noon. "It's done," she said simply. "Okay," I replied, my voice distant. "Jason," she added, her tone softening, "I know this has been hard, but you've handled it better than most people would." "Thanks," I said, though her words didn't register fully. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, letting the silence settle around me. That evening, Elise called. Her name flashing on my phone felt like a punch to the gut. I debated letting it ring, but something in me, curiosity, closure, maybe even stubbornness, made me pick up. "Hi," she said, her voice hesitant. There was a long pause. Then, she said, "I got the papers." "Yeah, so did I." Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, unsteady and shallow. "It's strange," she said finally, "knowing it's really over." "It's been over for a while, Elise," I said, not unkindly. "We were just dragging the pieces around, hoping they'd fit together again." "I hate how I hurt you," she whispered. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. "I hate it too, but it doesn't change anything." "I still love you," she said, her voice breaking. The words hung in the air, heavy and bittersweet. A few months ago, I would have clung to them like a lifeline. Now, they felt like echoes of something I couldn't hold on to anymore. "I know," I said softly, "but love isn't enough. Not for this." Her sobs broke through the phone, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. This pain was hers to carry now, just as I'd carried mine. "Goodbye, Elise," I said, my voice steady. "Goodbye," she whispered. When the call ended, I set the phone down and let out a long breath. That night, I went back to the lake. The air was cool, the water calm. I stood at the edge, watching the moonlight ripple across the surface. This place, once full of memories of us, now felt like mine again. I thought about Elise and everything we'd shared, the good, the bad, the parts I'd never get back. There was no denying the love we'd had, but there was also no denying the damage. Some things can't be undone. I took out my phone and deleted her number. It felt final, like closing a door I wasn't planning to open again. As I stared at the water, I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. The betrayal still hurt, and maybe it always would, but the weight of it wasn't crushing me like it used to. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next morning, I started writing again. It wasn't much, just a few lines in a journal Eric had given me, but it felt good to put the chaos in my head into words. I wrote about trust, about love, about the pieces of myself I was still trying to reclaim. I didn't know where it would lead, but that wasn't the point. The point was starting. Later, as I walked through the city, the sunlight warm on my face, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window. For the first time, I didn't see a man defined by his betrayal or his heartbreak.